I spent 17 years building my dream cabin. No mortgage, no help, just blood, sweat, and splinters. Then one day, I came back from a business trip, and it was gone. Flattened. In its place? A $3 million mansion with a white fence and a smug HOA president waving at me like nothing ever existed. But she didn't know. I kept every document. Every land deed. Every photo. And in court, I didn't just take back my land, I took everything she built on it. It all started with a knock. Not the kind that comes from a neighbor borrowing sugar. No, this knock was from the county inspector holding a clipboard and an expression that made my stomach twist. "Mr. Callahan," he said, "I'm afraid you've got a zoning violation on file. This land's been reassigned." I blinked. Reassigned? My name is Wyatt Callahan. I'm 48 years old, a veteran, and the last person on earth who thought he could be pushed around. My grandfather left me that land in 1993. 37 acres of untouched mountain woods, a bubbling stream running behind the hill, and the old log cabin I rebuilt with my bare hands. It wasn't just property. It was legacy. It was peace. And now? Apparently, it wasn't mine anymore. I drove faster than I should have up that dirt road, tires sliding on the loose gravel. As I rounded the bend where the tall pines used to part and reveal my porch, my heart stopped. The cabin was gone. Flattened. Not burned, not abandoned, demolished. In its place stood a half-built, modern white monstrosity. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows, imported stone columns, even a goddamn Tesla parked on the gravel like it belonged there. There were voices, contractors. A woman in heels, barking orders and holding blueprint rolls. That was my land. "Excuse me," I shouted, stepping over the caution tape. She turned, brushing her red curls out of her eyes. Designer sunglasses perched on her forehead. The badge on her blazer read, HOA President. "Madeline Grange. You can't be here," she said curtly. "This is an active construction zone." I ignored that. "Where is my cabin?" She gave me a blank look. "I'm sorry." My cabin. My land. This was my home. There was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a tiny twitch, then that fake smile returned. "Sir, this is community property now. Acquired through legal pathways. If you have an issue, you'll need to take it up with the HOA legal board." I couldn't speak. I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. My hands were trembling. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in my truck across the road, headlights off, staring at the construction lights still glowing around what used to be mine. But what Madeline didn't know, what she never expected, was that I was meticulous. I had every document. My grandfather's handwritten deed. The original zoning map. Even the notarized transfer signed by Judge Wheeler himself back in '97. The next morning, I walked into the county clerk's office with a box of files and fire in my chest. "This," I said, slamming down the papers, "is a case of stolen land. And I'm not leaving until it's fixed." And that's when I found out, Madeline had friends in high places. Council members. Inspectors. Even the mayor's golf buddy was on her HOA board. But I wasn't scared. I was angry. And she was about to find out what happens when you steal from a man with nothing left to lose. The courthouse in Maple Ridge wasn't built for war. But when I walked through its doors that Monday morning, war is exactly what I brought with me. I stood at the clerk's desk, gripping a folder thick with yellowed pages and rusted paperclips. The young woman behind the glass gave me a tired smile. She probably thought I was here to dispute a parking ticket. "I need to file a property dispute. Urgent." She raised an eyebrow. "Sir, you'll need a land surveyor's report, tax ID, property history, title." I have all of it, I said, opening the folder and laying it out like a soldier presenting weapons before battle. The expression on her face changed. Her fingers stopped mid-air over her keyboard. This goes back 30 years. 42, actually, I said. My grandfather's land. Given to me. Lived on it since I was 20. And now some HOA which built a mansion over it. She flinched at the word. I didn't care. I was past diplomacy. After 2 hours and a dozen signed forms, the process was in motion. But what I didn't know, not yet, was that Madeline Grange had already anticipated this move. The court sent a notice to the HOA. I knew it wouldn't be long before she came to face me, not in her heels and sunglasses this time, but in full courtroom armor. And I was right. A black SUV pulled into my mechanic shop that Friday. I had grease on my hands, sweat pouring down my back, when she stepped out wearing an expensive gray blazer, heels clicking like gunshots on concrete. You're making a mistake, she said calmly, not even greeting me. No, Madeline, I said, wiping my hands with a rag. You did. And you're gonna pay for it. She took a slow breath. This land was marked as abandoned. Rezoned. The papers are signed. And who signed them? I asked. Because I sure as hell didn't. Her eyes flickered, but she stayed composed. You really want to drag this into court? You'll lose. I have the city on my side. The inspectors. The planning board. You'll bankrupt yourself trying. I stepped closer, inches from her. Lady, I built that cabin with my own 2 hands. I held my wife in that home while she died from cancer. I buried my dog under that old elm tree behind the porch. I don't care what it costs me. I'll burn every bridge in this town before I let you keep what's mine. For the first time, she looked shaken. Then she said something that made my blood boil. Maybe if you'd kept up with taxes, maintenance, and the new regulations, this wouldn't have happened. I laughed. Not because it was funny. But because it was exactly the kind of lie people like her tell themselves, that taking from others is somehow justified. That night, I stayed up going through every piece of paper. Phone records. Tax receipts. Old photo albums with the cabin in the background, snow falling on the roof, my wife smiling in a wool coat. I scanned them all. And then I did what any cornered man would do in 2025, I uploaded every piece to a website I built overnight. cabinstolen.com. I posted the story. The evidence. The court filing. Photos of me rebuilding that roof in '04 after a lightning storm split it in half. A screenshot of the demolition crew trespassing on my property. I didn't know if anyone would care. But they did. By sunrise, local journalists were calling. A retired judge from 2 counties over emailed me saying he remembered my grandfather's case. Even a land rights attorney from the city offered to help, pro bono. Madeline thought this would be quiet. She thought I'd fold. But this wasn't just a court case anymore. It was a movement. And I'd just lit the match. By Monday afternoon, cabinstolen.com had gone viral in 3 counties. I didn't expect it to catch fire like that. One article in the Maple Ridge Herald, and suddenly everyone in town had an opinion. Truckers, veterans, even college kids started sharing my story. Hashtags like #JusticeForTheCabin and #GrangeTheLandThief began trending locally. Madeline? She pretended it didn't matter. She stood on the freshly poured marble steps of her mansion and smiled for the camera, calling it a misunderstanding, in front of Channel 6 News. She said things like, the previous structure was unsalvageable. The land was cleared properly. Everything was filed by the book. But her voice was tight. Her fingers twitched. And just behind her, a faint crack had begun to snake its way down the flawless plastered wall of her dream home. Meanwhile, I wasn't slowing down. The website now had testimonies. My neighbor Mr. Higgins, 83 and half blind, wrote a letter to the paper, swearing he'd seen me living on that land every year since '95. A photo of me and my late wife sitting on the porch during the 4th of July surfaced, dated and time-stamped. The pressure built. And Madeline? She tried to fight back. She filed for a gag order. She sent a cease and desist to my website host. She even tried to spin the narrative, claimed I'd abandoned the land years ago and that I was unstable and possibly suffering from PTSD. Low blow. I stood in court that Friday, flanked by a lawyer who refused to take a dime from me, and listened as her attorney painted me as some kind of recluse veteran with delusions of ownership. When it was my turn, I stepped forward. No notes. No script. Just memory and pain. My name is Wyatt Callahan. I built that cabin with my hands. I raised a family there. I buried my wife there. And one day, I came home to nothing but dust and concrete. And now this woman wants to call me crazy for remembering where I came from? The judge looked at me a long time. Then he said, "We'll hear this case. Full review. Land surveys. Ownership records. Everything. No dismissals." It wasn't a win. But it was survival. And that was enough for now. Madeline's HOA board began to feel the ripple. 3 members resigned quietly. 2 others were caught in old email threads where they discussed fast-tracking land approvals without notifying certain owners. I leaked those emails, anonymously. Suddenly, City Hall was on fire metaphorically. Investigations were opened. Inspectors were suspended. The mayor stopped showing up to ribbon cuttings. And Madeline? She started locking her gates. But here's the thing about building on stolen ground, it doesn't take much to shake it. That Friday night, I sat on the hood of my truck across from that mansion, where my cabin once stood, and I watched a plumbing truck pull up in a hurry. A burst pipe. A minor flood. I smiled. Nature had a sense of humor. But the best part? She saw me. From her balcony. Standing there under the streetlight, arms folded, a ghost of the man she tried to erase. She didn't wave this time. She didn't smirk. She closed the curtains. Because she knew, this wasn't over. The next week, the real evidence would arrive, maps, hidden titles, and a letter buried so deep in the county's archives it took an intern 3 days to find it. And that letter? It would break her. The letter arrived in a manila envelope, hand-delivered by a young woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days. "I was told you're the guy who had a cabin stolen," she said, holding out the envelope with shaky hands. "My boss made me dig through 4 decades of dusty records. You might want to sit down for this." I didn't sit. I tore it open right there in the parking lot, hands trembling like I was defusing a bomb. It wasn't just a letter. It was proof. A handwritten memo dated October 17, 1993, signed by the former county surveyor and addressed to the county registrar. It stated clearly, "Lot 42A remains under permanent private ownership by Mr. Wyatt Callahan and his heirs. This parcel is not eligible for HOA incorporation or city acquisition unless purchased directly from the owner. Any future action must include notarized consent." My breath caught. This letter had never been included in my land records, because it had been quietly buried. Ignored. Forgotten. Maybe even intentionally hidden. But now it was mine. That evening, I stood in my shop with the original deed, the photos, the tax receipts, and now this letter, laid out like a soldier's armor before battle. I stared at it all as if it might disappear if I blinked. I sent copies to my lawyer. I sent another to the courthouse. and one to the local press. And finally, I slipped one into an unmarked envelope and left it wedged between the iron gates of Madeline Grange's mansion. She got it. Because the next day, the glass windows of her foyer were drawn shut, the "For Sale" sign gone from the lawn, and two blacked-out SUVs were parked out front like shields. She was panicking. And I was just getting started. The court called for an emergency hearing the following week. The judge wanted to review the newly recovered document, and this time, it wasn't just about who owned what. It was about fraud. I wore the same denim jacket I used to wear in the cabin winters. My lawyer looked like he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. Madeline, though? She didn't show. Her attorney arrived red-faced and sweating, holding a last-minute motion to delay the hearing. The judge denied it cold. The authenticity of this document is not in dispute, the judge said, holding up the 1993 memo. It bears a government stamp, an official seal, and is cross-referenced with public zoning maps from the same year. Then he turned toward our side of the room. Mr. Callahan, it appears your land was never legally transferred. This mansion, as grand as it may be, is built on stolen property. There was silence. No gavel slam. Just silence. The court didn't cheer. There was no applause. But I felt it, that deep, shaking moment of justice crawling back into the bones of a man who'd lost everything. Outside the courthouse, a local reporter shoved a mic in my face. "What's your next move, Mr. Callahan?" I looked straight into the lens. She took my home. Now the court says it's mine again. I'm not just taking the land back. I'm taking the walls she built with lies. Brick by brick. That night, I went back to the cabin site, or what used to be. I stepped through the gate. The concrete driveway felt cold under my boots. The air was different now, not angry, not anxious. It felt cleansed. I walked to where the porch used to be. Closed my eyes. I could almost hear the creak of the old swing. My wife laughing from the kitchen window. The quiet hum of the radio during winter nights. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. And Madeline Grange was about to lose everything she stole, in public, in court, and in front of every damn person she tried to fool. The courthouse was packed. Not just with lawyers and officials, but with neighbors, journalists, and strangers I didn't even know, people who'd read my story, followed the updates, and came to see what justice looked like when it finally wore work boots and smelled like sawdust. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everybody who'd ever been steamrolled by money and power. Madeline walked in late. Gone were the heels and the tailored suit. She wore all black now. Like someone in mourning. Her eyes were hidden behind oversized sunglasses, but nothing could cover the way her shoulders slumped under the weight of what was coming. She didn't make eye contact with me. Didn't even glance. Her attorney shuffled beside her with a stack of papers that, for all their polish, couldn't erase the truth. The judge adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. After thorough review of the newly recovered deed, the 1993 memorandum, and supporting evidence from both parties, he began, "This court finds that the construction of the Grange residence was conducted without proper legal acquisition of Lot 42A. There it was. Every word hit like thunder. In layman's terms, the judge continued, Mr. Wyatt Callahan never lost legal ownership of the property. The demolition of his original structure and the construction of the new one were unauthorized and therefore constitute unlawful trespass and property destruction." A murmur spread through the room. Madeline stood motionless. "The court hereby rules in favor of Mr. Callahan. Title of the land and all structures upon it shall be returned to him. Furthermore, the court will determine appropriate restitution for emotional damages, legal costs, and the destruction of Mr. Callahan's home." That last part? That was the dagger. She didn't just lose the mansion, she'd have to pay for destroying the cabin that stood before it. Every nail. Every beam. Every ounce of memory she tried to bury beneath her foundation. Her attorney leaned toward her and whispered something. She didn't nod. She didn't flinch. She just sat there like a statue, glass-eyed and lifeless. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Cameras. Microphones. And me, the guy who used to live in a hand-built cabin deep in the pines, now standing at the center of a storm that wasn't mine to start, but damn well ended with my name carved in stone. A young reporter asked, "What does justice feel like, Mr. Callahan?" I paused. Then said quietly, "Like coming home." But the war wasn't over. The court had ruled, but Madeline still had 30 days to vacate the property. 30 days to watch the walls she built, with lies, bribes, and stolen blueprints, crumble around her. She tried to file an appeal. Denied. She tried to offer me money. I refused. She sent a message through her lawyer, "Let's make a deal. I'll sell it to you for half the market value." I sent one back. "You're not selling anything. You're leaving." And then, the unraveling began. HOA members started coming forward. A whistleblower from the city planning office released internal memos showing fast-tracked permits and ignored inspections. Her personal assistant quit and leaked audio of Madeline mocking backwoods losers who don't know how to fight. It was over. Not just the court case. Her reputation. Her influence. Her empire. Gone. I drove up the mountain road one last time, not with rage in my chest, but with resolve. I stepped out, wind brushing past me like an old friend, and stood at the edge of my land. The mansion still stood, for now. But it looked smaller. Hollow. As if it knew it didn't belong. In a few days, it would be emptied out. And then, I'd decide, tear it down and rebuild my cabin from scratch, or let it rot as a monument to what happens when greed tries to steal from grief. Either way, she was gone. And I was finally home. The mansion stood still, like a monument to arrogance, as the moving trucks rolled in. I stood by the old gravel road where my pickup used to be parked, arms crossed, watching from a distance. Madeline hadn't shown her face in days. Everything was being packed by professionals. Sculptures, chandeliers, velvet furniture, all bubble-wrapped and wheeled down the same hill where my cabin porch once sat. It felt surreal. Not because I'd won, but because for the first time in years, the mountain air smelled right again. I walked up slowly, boots crunching over the driveway that once covered my garden. My lawyer said I didn't need to be there in person, but I needed to see it. To feel it. The front door was wide open. One of the movers looked nervous when I stepped onto the porch. "You the new owner?" "No," I said quietly, looking around. "I'm the old one." He nodded, unsure what that meant. But I knew. Every room I stepped into had a shadow of what used to be. Where a massive kitchen now stood, there used to be a fire pit with my wife's iron kettle. The marble staircase had replaced the old oak tree whose bark she carved our initials into when we were 26. It hurt. It hurt. It burned. But it wasn't grief anymore. It was a wound finally scabbing over. That evening, I walked out back where the porch swing used to creak in the breeze. The elm tree still stood, scarred but standing. I walked over and ran my fingers over the bark. The carving was gone, but I remembered exactly where it was. I didn't need to see it. It lived in me. Down the hill, I saw her. Madeline. Alone. No sunglasses this time. No heels. Just a woman in a black sweater holding a folder close to her chest like a life jacket. She looked older. Smaller. She didn't approach. But she did speak. "I didn't think you'd show up," she said, voice hoarse. "Most people just take the win and disappear." I didn't move closer. You erased my life. I had every right to watch yours pack itself into boxes. She nodded slowly. Her eyes were red, cheeks hollow. I thought if I made it beautiful enough, no one would question it, she said. You stole a grave, I said flatly. That cabin wasn't just wood and nails. My wife died in that house. Her hand touched every beam. You didn't just bulldoze a building. You bulldozed her. Her chin quivered, but I didn't care. You had everything, I added. And you still wanted mine. I wanted clean lines. New builds. Something perfect, she whispered. I thought if I just erased the past, it would stop hurting. That stopped me. Not because I forgave her. But because in some twisted way. I understood. We both had ghosts. But she paved over hers with polished floors and lied to herself until the cracks got too deep. You should go, I said. She nodded. The movers will be done by nightfall. The deed will transfer officially tomorrow. She turned to walk away, then stopped. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. I didn't answer. She didn't deserve closure. That night, I stood in the center of the now empty mansion. The silence was deafening. No voices. No laughter. No spirit. Just echoes of things that didn't belong here. I lit a fire in a metal barrel out back and dropped in the final papers, the original HOA blueprints, the false zoning approval, the appeal request Madeline filed. Each burned with a crackle that sounded like healing. Then I took a can of red spray paint and walked to the concrete driveway. In big letters, I wrote, "This land remembers." Because it did. The soil remembered every footstep of mine. The wind still knew my name. And the stars above had watched me mourn, rebuild, fight, and win. I wasn't done yet. The cabin would rise again. Not for revenge. Not even for memory. But for peace. And Madeline? She wouldn't be able to step foot in this valley again without remembering whose land it really was. The first log went up just after sunrise. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't cut straight. But it was mine. I stood there with work gloves on, sleeves rolled up, heart pounding the same way it had the first time I raised walls on this land. The wind blew cold through the pines, carrying the scent of sawdust and pine resin, a scent that had once defined my life. The mansion was gone. Madeline's palace of lies had been stripped to its bare bones and sold off in pieces. What couldn't be moved, I tore down myself. Bit by bit. Beam by beam. And where polished floors once covered memory, I planted wildflowers. The earth had waited patiently. And now, it was breathing again. Neighbors began stopping by. Folks I hadn't seen in years. Some brought nails. Others brought food. One man, an old friend of my father's, brought the same hammer my grandfather once used. It was rusted and heavy, but it felt right in my grip. I heard about everything, he said. Figured you could use something from the old days. I smiled for the first time in months. We rebuilt slowly. Not with contractors or blueprints, but with muscle and memory. I knew every inch of that land. Where the roots ran deepest. Where the soil held tightest. Where the sun rose just right through the window over the sink. Each log I lifted was a silent middle finger to every person who said I couldn't take her down. But I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. Anger had been the fuel to fight. But now, I was building for something. Peace. One evening, just before the new roof went up, I sat by the fire pit, the same place my wife and I used to share coffee and watch deer slip through the trees. I held her wedding ring in my hand. I'd kept it all these years, strung around a leather cord, tucked in a box beneath my truck seat. I'd planned to bury it when the cabin was finished, beside the elm tree where her ashes had been spread. But something told me to wear it, just once, while the house was going up. Like she was helping. And maybe, she was. The last week of fall brought something I didn't expect, a letter. No return address. No signature. Inside was a single note, handwritten in tight, shaky cursive, "You were right. It was never mine. I hope you find peace where I tried to build silence. No apology. No begging for forgiveness. Just a confession from the one person who had tried to erase me." I tossed the letter in the fire. Some ghosts need to stay burned. Winter came softly that year. The roof was on. The fireplace worked. The floors creaked, just like before. I brought in an old rocking chair, sat by the window, and watched the snow fall where the mansion's patio once stood. No more court dates. No more press calls. No more stolen dreams. Just silence, the good kind. One morning, I walked to the elm tree. The bark had begun to split, age catching up. But I still remembered the spot. With a small blade, I carefully recarved our initials, W+E, just like she had all those years ago. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was resurrection. I built a small wooden sign and hammered it into the ground near the road. Callahan Cabin, EST 1995 Rebuilt 2025. And beneath that, in smaller print, "This land remembers." Because some places don't forget. Not the pain. Not the love. Not the fight it took to protect them. And now, neither would I.